Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday, and also happy Juneteenth. If you don't know what Juneteenth is, I encourage you to take just a minute today to look it up and find out. I think a lot of us are learning anew what Juneteenth is, or more about this holiday. So as we do celebrate and recognize today as Juneteenth, I wanted to share another podcast that I listened to, that I was actually saving for today and listened to on my walk this morning. It is a podcast on the On Being radio show that's hosted by Krista Tippett, and she interviewed a woman named Eula Biss, a writer named Eula Biss. The interview itself is a couple years old, and Eula Biss had written a pretty impactful piece called White Debt that ran in the New York Times about 5 years ago. It's a really impactful piece if you have a chance to look it up and find it. And I'll also post a link to the podcast in the comments below so you can listen more if you would like. But the conversation between Krista Tippett and Eula Biss focuses largely on whiteness, the concept of whiteness and that frame, but also it's wide-ranging vocabulary, including the word complacency and what that means, and whether or not it's a good descriptor of white actions when we look at racism. They also talk about the concept of opportunity hoarding and the word debt itself. I think that's really interesting. Did you know, for instance, that in the German language, the word for guilt is the same as the word for debt? There's a lot there to unpack. But there's one particular point of the interview where Krista Tippett asks Eula, what do you think the state of white people is in the United States? What's the state of white people? And she says, and I'm going to see if I can find the word here. She says the state of white life in the United States it's like we're living in a house we believe we own, but that we've never paid off. That the state of white life, she says, is like we're living in a house we own, but we've never paid off. There's a lot to that, isn't there? And more than we can discuss this morning. But I think one of the points she's making is it gets into that conversation about debt or guilt. And she argues that, we think of guilt as a bad thing, but really it's an important part in the cog of the machinery of the consciousness, really of morality, to bring attention to wrongs, and it could be something that we also could use to propel us forward in a positive, productive way. And so I think sometimes white people get stuck in that guilt place when we talk about race in the United States, and it's hard to get past that. But she argues that really we should use it to our advantage. Well, not advantage, but use it to propel us forward. So I think, again, I would encourage us today to ask ourselves, particularly those of us who are white, what is the state of white life in the United States today? What is the state of my white life in particular? If I were to answer that question, I would say, with what I've seen and read and experienced lately, I would say the state of white life in the United States today is that of fear, defensiveness, and being on the attack. Fear, defensiveness, and being on the attack, those are really harmful things, and I think we have to find a way to move from fear, defensiveness, and being on the attack to a place of openness and vulnerability, and move there. I think our tradition, certainly our religious tradition, certainly has a lot to say about those concepts of love and openness and vulnerability. So again, I think that's what I'm going to be continuing to reflect on a bit on this Juneteenth, on this Friday, is what is the state of white life broadly? What is the state of my white life? What do I want it to be? I think just as it is absolutely critical that we take time to envision what Black liberation could look like, what it could sound like, feel like, smell like, taste like. We need to also look at what alternatives do we want for white life in the United States, and imagine that as well. If we don't imagine it and describe it, we can't get to that place either. So for those in our community, our black beloveds in our community, I wish you a day of celebration and joy and rest and laughter and whatever you need. For those of us who are white, I encourage us to continue to to reflect, to find where we need to grow personally and take action. So I wish you everybody a happy Juneteenth, a good Friday, and a good weekend. Bye-bye.